We've all been there, lying in bed, replaying every conversation, every red flag we ignored, crying into the same pillow night after night, hoping the pain will eventually do the healing for us. But here's the truth, no one tells you crying isn't the cure. Yes, it's human. Yes, it releases emotion, but tears don't fix patterns. They don't rebuild confidence. And they don't move your life forward. If you want to actually start feeling better, not just tonight, but for good, then you need more than just an outlet. You need a strategy, a shift, a new standard. So if you're ready to stop feeling stuck and start becoming stronger, let's talk about what actually works. It's natural to feel pain. It's even necessary. When something breaks your heart, whether it's a breakup, a betrayal, or even just the slow, quiet end of something you thought would last, your emotions need somewhere to go. Crying is one way we release them. And in that sense, crying isn't wrong. In fact, it can be incredibly cathartic. But here's where most people get stuck. They confuse feeling the pain with fixing the problem. They think that if they cry enough, hurt enough, dwell enough, somehow they'll cross some invisible finish line where the pain disappears and clarity shows up. It doesn't work like that. Pain is a message. It's your body and mind saying, hey, something's not right here. Pay attention. But once you've heard that message, the purpose of the emotion has been served. If you keep reliving it, if you sit in it too long, it stops being healing and starts becoming habitual. You begin to identify with the pain. It becomes the story you tell yourself. I'm broken. I've been abandoned. I wasn't enough. And when that story becomes your truth, your progress stalls. Not because you can't move forward, but because you're too caught up in waiting to feel better instead of deciding to do something different. The first step is realizing that your pain doesn't need more airtime. It needs action. Crying might be part of the journey, but it's not the destination. It's like sitting in your car, engine running, foot on the gas, but never shifting into drive. You burn fuel, but go nowhere. You might think you're processing, but often what we call processing is just looping, going over the same conversations, the same memories, hoping they'll look different if we examine them long enough. But they won't. The only thing that changes when you keep staring at the past is your ability to see the future. So what do you do instead? You start with something small. You get out of bed when you don't want to. You text a friend not to complain but to reconnect. You go for a walk. You start a journal, not to write about how sad you are, but to ask yourself what you've learned. You stop asking why they did what they did and start asking what you can do now. These are the moments where healing begins. Not when the tears come, but when you act in spite of them. That's the real shift, moving from emotion to intention. Pain wants you to react. Growth asks you to respond. And those two things are not the same. A reaction is crying for hours and texting them again just to feel something. A response is noticing the urge, sitting with it and choosing not to. That's strength. And it doesn't always feel dramatic or inspiring. Often it feels boring, slow, frustrating. But that's what real transformation looks like. Quiet, persistent choices that move you forward, even when your feelings want to pull you back. You don't heal by waiting for the pain to pass. You heal by deciding that, even with the pain, you're still going to show up for yourself. And the more you do that, day by day, choice by choice, the quieter the pain becomes, until one day, without even realizing it, you stop crying not because you forced yourself to, but because you don't need to anymore. You've outgrown the version of yourself who thought pain was the whole story. Now, you're writing a new one. Pain has a way of making everything feel urgent. When you're hurting, your brain wants answers, closure, justice, something, anything to soothe the chaos you feel inside. That's why emotional reactions are so tempting. You want to scream, text them, post something vague on social media, or scroll endlessly to numb the ache. It feels like you're doing something, like you're releasing the pressure. But emotional reactions rarely lead to relief. They lead to more confusion, regret, and often even more pain. They don't create resolution. They just prolong the drama. There's a critical moment that comes after heartbreak or disappointment where you have to make a decision. Will I react emotionally and lose control, or will I respond intentionally and take it back? It's not easy, especially when emotions are loud and logic is quiet. But if you can pause, even for a few seconds, you give yourself the space to choose a response that serves you instead of sabotaging you. Because let's be honest, when has sending that angry message at midnight actually made you feel better the next day? Replacing emotional reactions with empowered decisions is about recognizing your own agency. It's refusing to let someone else's behavior dictate how you live your life. Just because someone hurt you doesn't mean you have to hand them the pen and let them write the next chapter. You take that pen back by making decisions that reflect your worth, not your wounds. So how do you start making empowered decisions when you're in the middle of emotional chaos? First, you get curious instead of reactive. When you feel the urge to act on emotion, ask yourself, what am I really feeling right now? Often, anger is covering sadness. Sadness is hiding rejection. Rejection is tied to self-worth. If you can name it, you can start to deal with the real emotion, not just the surface impulse. Next, you ask yourself, what's one thing I can control right now? That question shifts your energy immediately. You can't control what they said, what they did, or how they left. But you can control how you respond, what you say next, what you allow back into your life. That's where your power lies. Not in the past, not in their opinion, but in your next move. Sometimes the most empowered decision you can make is to stay silent. Sometimes it's to block, unfollow, or walk away without explanation. Sometimes it's to invest in your physical health, set new goals, or finally commit to that thing you've been putting off. Empowerment doesn't always feel good in the moment. It often feels uncomfortable, uncertain, and even lonely. But over time, it feels like strength, and that strength builds self-respect, which is ultimately what heals you. Another powerful truth: you don't have to feel ready to make a good decision. You just have to decide. Clarity rarely comes before action. Most of the time, you have to move forward while still feeling confused, heartbroken, or afraid. But once you do, clarity catches up with you. The more empowered decisions you make, the less emotional control your pain has. You begin to see your situation differently. You start to realize that you don't need closure to move on, validation to feel valuable, or an apology to grow. You realize that the real power was in your hands the entire time. Pain will always try to control your story by pulling you back into reaction mode. But if you choose to lead with intention, to respond instead of react, you become the one writing the narrative. Not your ex, not your past, not your emotions, you. And when you live from that place, the chaos may still show up, but it doesn't get to run the show anymore. You do. One of the biggest reasons people stay stuck after a breakup or painful experience isn't because they miss the person. It's because they miss the fantasy. They miss the version of the relationship they built in their head. The one where it all made sense, where the love was mutual, where they were understood, chosen, and safe. But if we're honest, that's rarely the full picture. What we mourn isn't always what was. It's what could have been if things had gone the way we hoped. That imagined future, the potential that never came to life, becomes harder to let go of than the person themselves. This is what keeps people trapped. You're not stuck on them. You're stuck on the idea of them. You remember the highlight reel. The moments that made you feel alive. The way they looked at you when it was good. The promises they made. The way you imagined things would evolve. And it's those memories that sneak in late at night and whisper, maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe you could try again. Maybe this time it could work. But that voice isn't truth. It's nostalgia filtered through loneliness. If you want to heal and move forward, you have to stop romanticizing the version of the relationship that didn't exist. Yes, maybe they had good moments. Most people do. But a few good memories don't cancel out a pattern of pain, confusion, or inconsistency. Your brain will want to defend the past because familiarity feels safer than uncertainty. But that safety is an illusion. You have to be brave enough to look at the relationship as it actually was, not as you wished it to be. This means asking yourself the hard questions. Was I truly happy, or just emotionally attached? Was I respected consistently, or only when they feared losing me? Was I loved fully, or conditionally, only when it was easy? These questions may hurt, but they strip away the fantasy and bring you back to reality. And healing only happens in reality. Part of the pain in letting go comes from realizing that you were hoping someone would grow into a version of themselves they never chose to become. You saw their potential, and you held on, thinking that with enough time, love, or patience, they'd finally get there. But people don't transform because we love them enough. They transform because they choose to. And if they didn't choose that for themselves, they were never going to choose it for you either. It's not your job to wait for someone to become who you needed them to be. It's your job to recognize when they're not and make the hard, self-respecting choice to walk away. You don't owe anyone endless chances. You owe yourself peace. And that peace begins when you stop rewriting history to justify your pain. The truth is, when you let go of the fantasy, you make space for something real, real connection, real respect, real intimacy. Not the version you have to chase, fix, or earn, but the kind that meets you where you are. That can't happen while you're still mentally stuck in a place that never gave you those things to begin with. This is why closure doesn't come from conversations. It comes from clarity, from seeing things clearly, even when it hurts, from no longer needing to pretend that it was better than it was, from being honest with yourself about what you truly deserve and what you never want to tolerate again. Only then can you move forward, not just free from them, but finally free from the version of the story that kept breaking your heart. It's easy to say you have high standards, that you want respect, consistency, real love, that you won't settle for less. But here's the uncomfortable truth. It's not your standards that determine your experience. It's your boundaries. You can have the highest standards in the world, but if you don't have the discipline to enforce them, they're just nice ideas, words, aspirations. Real self-respect shows up in what you do, not just what you say. People often confuse wanting something with being ready to receive it. You might say you want a partner who communicates, shows up, and makes you a priority. But then you keep answering texts from someone who disappears for days. You accept half-hearted apologies. You go back to someone who gives you crumbs and call it chemistry. That's not a standards problem. That's a boundaries problem. And boundaries are the bridge between the life you want and the one you keep repeating. Boundaries are not about being harsh or closed off. They're about being clear. They say, this is what I allow into my life. This is how I expect to be treated. This is what I will no longer tolerate. They protect your peace, energy, and self-worth. And here's the thing, people will test them. Not because they're bad people necessarily, but because human beings push limits. It's how we learn where the lines are. If you keep shifting your boundaries every time someone gives you just enough attention to keep you hooked, you're training people to believe that your standards are negotiable. You don't need to explain your boundaries over and over. You just need to enforce them. Silence is enforcement. Walking away is enforcement. Not responding to mixed signals is enforcement. The moment you start acting from a place of self-worth instead of fear of being alone, fear of losing someone, fear of seeming too much, you start attracting relationships that reflect your true value. Here's what makes this difficult. Boundaries often require you to let go of something you want in the short term for the sake of what you deserve in the long term. You might have feelings for someone, but if they don't meet your standards, your boundary says, feelings aren't enough. You might crave connection, but your boundary says, not at the expense of my peace. It takes strength to walk away from what's familiar, especially when your heart is still attached. But that strength is what builds your confidence. Because every time you uphold a boundary, you prove to yourself that you're not here to beg for the bare minimum. You're here to choose what aligns with your worth. Sometimes we blame others for treating us poorly, but the truth is, people treat you the way you allow them to. That doesn't mean you're responsible for their behavior. It means you're responsible for how long you stay. The longer you stay in situations that disrespect your standards, the more disconnected you become from the version of yourself who believed in something better. Reconnecting with that version takes action, not a conversation, not closure, action. High standards don't scare the right people, they filter out the wrong ones. The people who are meant for you won't need convincing. They'll rise to meet your standards because they already live by similar values. You won't need to constantly negotiate your needs, explain why consistency matters, or feel guilty for expecting effort. The right person will see your boundaries not as walls, but as clarity. And they'll appreciate that because they have boundaries too. If you want to change your life, stop focusing on what you want from others and start focusing on what you allow. Boundaries are your way of saying to the world, I know who I am, and I refuse to abandon that just to keep someone else comfortable. That's not arrogance. That's self-respect. And when you live from that place, everything changes, especially the people you choose to let in. Pain can either consume you or create you, and the difference is what you do with it. After heartbreak or loss, most people sit in the wreckage, hoping time alone will fix things. But time doesn't heal without movement. Pain left unchanneled becomes stagnant. It turns into rumination, self-doubt, and in some cases, self-sabotage. But when pain is turned into motion, into something constructive, it becomes a catalyst for growth. That's where the shift happens, when you stop asking why this happened to you, and start asking what you can build from it. Turning pain into a project doesn't mean suppressing it. It means giving it purpose. Instead of using your energy to replay the same conversations or stalk their social media, you use it to create momentum. You write about what you're going through. You throw yourself into the gym, your career, your creativity. You show up even when your heart still feels heavy, especially when it does. Because every time you do, you remind yourself that your identity isn't rooted in what you lost, but in what you're capable of becoming. You don't need to wait to feel ready to begin. The best projects come from the rawest places. When you channel heartbreak into something that challenges you, the pain doesn't disappear overnight, but it starts to reshape. You begin to see it less as a wound and more as fuel. The goal isn't to distract yourself, it's to transform. To use the very thing that tried to break you as proof that you won't stay broken. This isn't about being hyper-productive to avoid your feelings. It's about realizing that action is a form of healing, that small daily choices, working out, journaling, learning something new, setting goals, builds self-trust. You start to rebuild a version of yourself that's stronger, more self-aware, and less willing to tolerate what hurt you in the first place. Every time you show up for yourself, you reinforce the belief that you're worth fighting for, and that belief changes everything. The truth is, heartbreak is fertile ground for reinvention. When something ends, you're left with space, and space can feel terrifying at first. It's empty, unfamiliar, but it's also full of possibility. You get to redefine who you are outside of that relationship, outside of their validation, outside of the version of you that made yourself small just to keep the peace. You get to decide who you want to become, not based on what you lost, but based on what you're building now. It doesn't have to be dramatic. You don't need to quit your job or move across the country, unless you want to. Sometimes the project is just you. A better morning routine, a more honest journal, a plan to get financially independent, emotionally grounded, or creatively inspired. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. You just need to look in the mirror and know that even if things didn't go your way, you didn't let it define you. You built something from the rubble. And that something is you. This approach doesn't mean you won't still have hard days. You will. There will be moments when the grief hits unexpectedly, when you miss them, when you question everything. That's normal. The difference is that now you have somewhere to put those feelings. You have structure. intention, a reason to keep going, even when your heart still feels bruised. Because healing isn't passive. It's not just about waiting for time to dull the ache. It's about creating a life so full of meaning, growth, and purpose that the pain has nowhere left to live. When you give yourself something to build, you're not just getting over the past. You're creating a future that makes the past irrelevant. Closure is one of the most misunderstood ideas in healing. People think it's something someone else is supposed to give them. A final conversation, a long overdue apology, an explanation that finally makes it all make sense. So they wait. They wait for that message, that phone call, that moment when the other person shows up with clarity and regret. But most of the time, that moment never comes. And even when it does, it usually doesn't satisfy the way we imagined it would. Because closure that comes from someone else is always incomplete. It might help you understand their reasons, but it won't erase the pain they caused or restore the time you lost. That's why real healing starts when you stop waiting for closure and start creating clarity for yourself. Clarity isn't about tying everything up with a perfect answer. It's about being honest with yourself about what actually happened without sugarcoating or romanticizing it. It's the moment when you stop asking, "Why did they do this?" and start asking, "What did this teach me about what I need, what I value, and what I deserve?" You don't need their side of the story to validate your experience. You lived it. You felt what you felt, and that's enough to honor your reality. We often chase closure because we think it will make the ending hurt less. But what actually eases the pain is acceptance. Not acceptance of what happened as, "oh, okay," but acceptance that it happened, that it can't be changed, and that it's no longer your responsibility to carry. When you create clarity, you take the power back. You no longer hand your peace of mind to someone who didn't protect it when they had the chance. Creating clarity is about choosing to stop participating in the confusion. That might mean blocking someone who keeps breadcrumbing you. It might mean writing down everything you overlooked or excused in the relationship, not to shame yourself, but to remind yourself of the truth when your mind tries to rewrite history. It might mean talking to a therapist, journaling, or simply making a firm decision that you don't need to understand their behavior to move forward from it. One of the hardest things to accept is that the person who hurt you isn't the one who can heal you. They may never acknowledge the pain they caused. They may rewrite the story to make themselves the victim. They may act like it meant nothing. But your healing was never supposed to depend on their accountability. It was always about you choosing to move in a direction where their lack of closure no longer defines your emotional reality. The real shift comes when you realize that clarity doesn't come from them. It comes from your decision to stop needing answers and start building a life that makes the questions irrelevant. You don't have to forgive them right away. You don't have to feel completely over it. You just have to decide that you're done giving your energy to a version of the story that keeps you stuck. You choose clarity when you stop looking back and start focusing on where you're going. That choice won't always feel powerful in the moment. It might feel like grief, like loneliness, like starting over. But underneath that discomfort is something stronger: freedom. Freedom from needing someone else's permission to move on. Freedom from the endless emotional ping-pong of what-ifs and maybes. And freedom to step into a new chapter that you get to write. One where peace isn't a gift someone gives you, but a standard you claim for yourself. Because in the end, closure isn't a moment. It's a decision. And clarity is what happens when you stop waiting for someone to make things right and you start choosing what's right for you. You don't heal by crying yourself to sleep every night, replaying what went wrong, or waiting for someone to finally see your worth. You heal by making a decision that your peace matters more than their apology, that your future deserves more attention than your past, and that you're not going to settle for being someone who survives pain. You're going to become someone who uses it. This isn't about pretending you're okay when you're not. It's about refusing to let pain be the final chapter. Crying may release what's inside, but clarity, action, standards, and self-respect, those are what rebuild you. Those are what actually work. So stop asking, when will it stop hurting? And start asking, what can I build with the strength I've found in the middle of this? Because you already have what you need to move forward. You just have to trust it, commit to it, and live like the person you're becoming is worth more than the one you're leaving behind. And they are. You are.